Mr. Caffrey. I was listening to a podcast of you last night. I had I was
Which
scrolling
one?
down. Yeah. Oh, I just Googled it. I just I was on on my on the podcast app, and then I just put in your name, and I was like, let's see what comes up here. And let's see, what was it? It was, you guys were definitely chummy with each other. I appreciate the this humor that you guys have. It's a little bit of this English humor. You guys are kind of just giving each other a little bit of a hard time, and I appreciate that. With the Keith Walsh podcast.
Oh yeah. Keith's great. He's like he's a DJ in Ireland, kind of a celebrity DJ, and had a big job in one of the main radio stations here, and then lost his gig, and really had to kind of really find himself because anxiety kicked in, sense of self was lost. So he's been on a really cool journey, and he shared an awful lot too. So we get on well because he's quite happy to be open and honest about his journey as well. So he's a lovely guy.
And that's the thing that is always nice about well, I guess not always, but that's what I think podcasting kind of allows, right? If you just have a mic and you have a story and you're able to just really be honest with yourself and honest with your guest and have an honest conversation, whoever, even if it's just one person listening to it, you feel like it's also a therapeutic thing, right? Like
Yeah.
just the and no, and that's how I kind of contacted you, and I appreciate so much that you genuinely instantly responded back to me. Um, that shows that that, I mean, obviously it was so nice of you to just be like, yeah, let's do this podcast, and especially on a topic where it's like not everybody just wants to wake up in the morning and talk about suicide and death, and it's kind of one of those topics. It's like, cool, man, let's do this. Um, yeah,
Yeah, it's not a difficult topic, but the problem is because it's not spoken about enough, it continues to become, epidemic in terms of its impact. And now more than ever, I see so much in terms of spikes of anxiety, stress, depression, as people are trying to prepare for whatever this kind of return to normal is.
mm,
It's really scaring people as to how they navigate that, because they've had the last 2 years of their life, then they had the previous however many years of their life, and now it's like, well, what's the next iteration look like, and how do I manage that? And a lot of people are struggling.
yeah. I'm in on that boat. I mean, just the whole process from the beginning of the pandemic. I was lucky, I think, to have found this Wim Hof breathing,
Mm.
and I know that you talk a lot about this vagus nerve, and so I kind of got onto that. How do you tap into that, Eric? Can you zoom me out just a little bit, because I feel like no, like not on the camera itself, like on the physical camera. Thanks. When you talk about the vagus nerve, yeah, can you explain to me how you work with that with your? There we go. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing how I came across it in many ways. I mean, I went into therapy myself. I think 7 years ago, 8 years ago now, probably, and um, I was struggling hugely in terms of my mental health. But what was also happening was my physical health had deteriorated. I used to be really fit, really healthy, in good shape. Um, but after the death of my son and my mental health started to deteriorate, I wasn't paying attention to the deterioration. So what happens in terms of our neurological development, and so much we understand from neuroscience in the last 20 years, which I became such a big fan of and studied. But the body wants to tell you that there's something here for you to pay attention to, and it will ask you to slow down. So it will introduce, pains and aches. It might be sore throats. If you're not paying attention to that, maybe you start to get a skin rash. Maybe you get something autoimmune like eczema or something appearing outside.
Okay.
But then internally things go wrong. So I ended up with irritable bowel syndrome. I ended up with leaky gut. I developed adult asthma, which I never had before. I had sinusitis. I had bronchitis. Like, all of my internal organs were just starting to fall apart. My sex drive just dropped off the cliff. Everything was just really slowing down. So when I went into therapy, I was lucky that I was with a therapist who was a trained psychiatrist, but he developed a technique which is born out of his own interactions with his grandfather and his own traditions in India, because he'd spent 25 years in medical terms prescribing drugs to people and seeing no results. So his first focus on me was, okay, we'll work on the mental side, but the physical side is important too. So we started to take vitamins and supplements to help my nervous system. I started to do exercises to connect to my nervous system. And in Indian tradition, they use the Kundalini as, the key thing that wraps around the body. And so in Kundalini yoga, you're focusing on this kind of serpent that's touching all points in the body, which is the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve does exactly the same thing. We think we've figured it out in the last 20 years in the West. We're like, oh yeah, we've got this so well sorted now. We understand everything about this. And the Indians have been dealing with this for 4,000 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. That I've also just gotten into this in the last year or so. This whole, I mean, it's always been there, but I'm now taking my practice seriously, I would say. Like, as far as that's very dualistic to say, right?
Yes.
I Remington am practicing meditation. It's like this. That's the exact opposite of what you want to achieve. But as long as just that. I heard in that podcast yesterday that you get up in the morning. Did you do that this morning? Was that your morning ritual? This getting up an hour and a half above everybody else and just having your time to.
Yes.
That's the bomb.
And today, because it's Wednesday, I also offer mindful walking and some Shinrin Yoko, which is forest bathing, but nature bathing. So I have a beach beside where I live, and every Wednesday morning at 6 a.m. for anybody who wants to come along, I provide guidance for an hour just to help them slow down, connect to nature, connect to themselves. We do some very slow walking, meditation, and then we sit for 10 minutes just simply connecting to nature. So it's part of my day every day, but one day a week, I also offer it to anybody who wants to come along. So it's nice. I like Wednesdays.
Yeah. And you did this, and you went to Japan, and you did this. It seems similar. It's what's it called exactly? I don't want to pronounce it incorrectly.
So it's forest bathing, and in Japanese, it's called Shinrin Yoko, which just literally means forest bathing.
Right. Okay.
But it's a tradition that goes back many years in Japanese culture, and particularly going back to Shintoism, which is the main kind of religious, and Shintoism isn't really religion; it's more of a spiritual path. But it's the main spiritual belief in Japan, and Shintoism is really about the human connection to nature, and the connection in the fact that implicitly we're nature and everything around us is nature. And I went to Japan to train with Yamabushi monks who practice Shigendo, and Shigendo is a mix of Shintoism and Buddhism that goes back 1,500 years. So that's kind of my spiritual path that I continue to walk on to this day.
Yeah. So ever since then, that's something that you just kept with you. It was.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, but there's I listened to a podcast a few weeks ago, and a famous Shigendo Japanese master was speaking on this podcast, and he was asked, is there anything else in the rest of the world that's comparable to Shigendo? And the interviewer said, like, another religion or another spiritual approach, and the master said, no, nothing at all. They're about to go on to another question, and he says, oh, actually, well, there is one thing. He said Celtic mysticism from Ireland is actually quite similar to Shigendo. So we have a very good history here in terms of mysticism and shamanism, which is nothing kind of black magic type thing, just simply connecting to nature and being with nature. So it was quite interesting to hear that there's a similarity here. So often you go to foreign lands to seek what you want to find, and actually it's right under your toes.
Yeah, and it's true. Like
Yeah.
every time I get out, even with especially with kids, we have three, and it's like we get out there and we're out in the forest and we're doing something. Everyone just finds that everyone comes down out of this almost like a toxic environment. My wife says in the living room on Saturday morning, if we're just kind of lounging around too much and we're not really getting outside, if it's a little rainy, the weather, it's it's similar here in northern Germany where we're at, Baltic area. It's like it gets to this depressive mood kind of, and it's rainy all the time, even in the summer, and it's like, oh, let's just stay inside and watch Netflix all day. And it's like just get out either way, and just to train yourself to I guess the first moment is like, I don't really want, well, now I see it in your eyes, like you're way beyond that. But for someone that hasn't done it before, it's like to go outside and to take that step. It always takes it takes a little bit of extra. I should just fight my internal urge to just stay comfortable in my house somehow.
Well, I have that every single
Okay.
day.
So that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Honestly, I have it because the thing is, when you study the neuroscience of the human being, and you understand our predisposition is preservation and survival. So all that we're pre-programmed to do is to seek shelter, feed ourselves, and procreate, right? So when we wake up in the morning, that's all the body looks for. And it doesn't want to push itself into unusual experiences, because then it thinks, that might be a threat to our life. So everything that your autonomic nervous system interacts with it either says, is this a threat to my life, or is it okay? So even like being uncomfortable about getting out of bed and going for a walk in nature, your autonomic nervous system thinks, no, you're better off just staying here. And that's when you end up then getting caught in kind of self-talk and negative behaviors. So I'm Remington, I'm completely there every day. I mean, my routine is so important to me, and I devote this kind of first 90 minutes to 2 hours of my day to myself. But I always meet myself in the morning thinking, oh, today I feel okay. But I only stay feeling okay because I continue to nurture and take care of myself.
I feel that's such a good way of putting it. And it's like I hear that there's this one thing I heard about someone like that's super flexible. These people that are like, the Olympics are on right now. So you have these amazing gymnasts, all these athletes, and talking about how they wake up sore every morning. You're like, wait a minute, aren't you supposed to reach a point as if you're a yoga master and you can, do all these stretching things that you would just wake up and feel like a gummy bear? But no, even these people feel sore every morning. So it's like it's nice to hear from you that someone that's totally integrated this in their life, that even you have to kind of face that and be like, no, let's go outside. And it's almost for me like kind of like a like a plant. Like when I water the plant too much, then I only it takes like 5 days for you to realize you put too much water in, and the opposite goes if you don't water it enough. It doesn't show right away, but it takes like 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 days, and you're like, oh, I've neglected this plant. And that's how meditation feels to me. And this morning routine, I have to be honest though, I've kind of been neglecting it in the last days. I do the breathing to kind of just hang, it keeps me in there. But this morning routine, in the summertime, I just had this excuse that it's just been too sunny, and at night to go to bed at 8:30 at night. I that's the that's always the thing. I'm worthless around 8 p.m. I'm good to go. Like I'm signing off everybody, because I know that like 4 o'clock is going to come around, and I need my 8 hours. I'm not one of these people. I
Yes.
guess some people can sleep on 6 hours, but I'm just not one of those people. So I know that yeah, but
I agree. Sleep is like the most important thing. If I was to think of all the things that I've learned over these years to cope with mental health, sleep is number one.
sleep number one. Yeah, isn't it interesting how sleep seems to be the first thing that gets disrupted too, right? And
Yeah. And when people come to me and they say, "Oh, I have insomnia," I think, well, okay, let's sit down and find out what you really have. Insomnia is here because there's something else that you haven't dealt with.
no,
So insomnia is a byproduct of you not being able to focus or manage whatever else is really going on in terms of your own mental health. So sleep is so important, because once sleep starts to to fall by the wayside, then the body starts to struggle in so many other ways, both mentally and physically.
And uh, it's so interesting that you went into this neurological area too. Like I just started myself like a beginning course at like an online Harvard beginning course, and that's just like so beginner. That's talking about the just basically the neuron and how you the electrical charge is measured outside of the cell wall, like the relativity of like how they measure it. So I'm at the very, very basics, but something about it, like it seems like it's maybe you can kind of kindle my 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 wanting to go into this area a little bit because it seems like it's a lot to learn. And you started out in the later age and you went into this whole neurological field. Where did you go? How did you navigate that education?
Well, I suppose like the funny thing is, what I learned in terms of my most important teachings came from Dr. Pradeep Chadha, who was the psychiatrist whose care I was in. And what he taught me was nothing to do with medicine, or his background in that regard. It was all about his philosophies and his approach to, getting close to our pain and being with it, and then noticing that it loses its power and it dissipates. And Pradeep always would say to me, "Well, that's it. That's all you need to know." And for me, I've come from a financial services background. I'm a certified investment fund director. I've built multiple companies in complex investment markets, so I understand the value of people in the West look to understand things in a more bite-sized approach, but they also want to know the kind of mechanical makeup of what they're doing and why they're doing it. From an Eastern perspective, that's kind of alien. They just go, "Well, why do you want to know? Just do it, and you'll feel better, and then you'll
Mm,
be okay."
mm,
So it kind of drew me to the idea of thinking, well, okay, why don't I study this so that I can translate it into both languages, a scientific language so people can understand it, and I can point to research, and simple practical tips as how they can manage things within their own nervous systems, but then also, keeping true to the nature of the Eastern philosophies and the approach, whether that's what I learned through Shigendo or through my teachings with Pradeep. So it's bringing the two together so that it's easy for the audience to discern, and people can take it from both sides. Like on my YouTube videos, if you look at my comments, some people just find the spiritual resonance, and some people find the neurological breakdown, and are so happy that they now understand what's happening inside their parasympathetic response to their autonomic nervous system. So you
mm.
get both sides of the equation. So people will hear the language that speaks to them. And that's why I wanted to try and move to that, to create the most fluid language that's easy for multiple people to understand. So if they're cynical about Eastern approaches, then there's Western science behind it as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I go both ways. It depends, I guess, on on my mood as someone that would consume that. But uh, yeah. So how long? Well, I guess how long? I don't know if that's really you were. I feel kind of bad making you tell your story. Like just if you want to hear your story, it's like just check out like there's so many like the podcast last night. Like I listened to it and I was like, I'm not gonna make him rehash that all again. It just seems like you know
No,
it's like
honestly, I don't mind. I mean, the thing is, for when I speak on podcasts, for me, what's really important is the one person who needs to hear it.
mm,
There's always somebody who needs to hear it, and that's what's important to me. It's this. We've got this great opportunity now to share, free resources to help people who are struggling, and to find something that resonates with them. So no, don't worry, man. I'm happy to talk about whatever you wanna cover.
yeah, okay. Well, I guess this thing that the reason I can't reached out to you was because well, I lost my cousin this year too. He was depressed, and I know COVID and this whole situation just threw him a curveball that he couldn't pick up. I just we all know that in our stomachs. Like God, it doesn't matter how it happened or what happened, but you just know he's just one of these cases where he needed a break, and right at the moment when he needed a break, he got fired from his job because whatever, and then he fell on the wayside. And even like his brothers, my other cousins that are really close to him weren't able to help him. And then they have my aunt and my uncle. It's just like, come on, no chance of and I'm so far away, so it's like, okay, this is even having this podcast and having this conversation, I know they're going to see this, so this is like a way of me for even to like having like some type of connection to the situation, because it's you know so there's all these like layers of how do you deal with that. And I remember like remember that Eric, like he would come in the studio here, and I made like a rap song for him or something, like and my wife was like, what are you trying to do here, and it was just like some thing that I never even released it. I never like put it out at all. It was just me like yelling into the microphone, trying to talk to him in some way, because I didn't have a chance to like say goodbye to him. And there was this whole thing, and it took like my wife like 2 or 3 weeks. She's like, what are you doing, you still like, because I was trying to practice it and perfect it, and it was just somehow just and after a while I realized that's what that was. But yeah, so that was kind of like, I feel like that was I almost like, I don't want to reopen it. It's like that's the weirdest thing about when you lose somebody, they're gone, and it's like, how do you just, how do you put it in its place, and everybody deals with it differently. And then how do I go there and be there for people that I can't physically be there for? Because I think in these situations, like you can only really go over to the house and just make them dinner, or you can only really physically be there, and you don't, the words and the idea of saying, if you need me, give me a call, that just puts the burden back on them. So it's like just taking any kind of burden away that you can. And then these people, like, you don't even know how they want to, maybe they don't want to deal with it at all. So if I'm like all good about dealing with it, I'm good, I'm mentally fit to deal with it. But they're like, they're not. So just leave them alone, and respecting that boundary. And I don't know, it's just, there's a lot of stuff I just touched on there, but
No,
uh,
no, absolutely. Thank you
as
for
someone,
sharing that.
yeah, and I guess this is someone that's been in a situation, with having a newborn, is just even more wrenching. But I guess you can never really quantify the loss of somebody, um, in
No,
that sense. So yeah,
no. I mean, exactly. I mean, the thing is, in terms of losing somebody that you love, it is incredibly painful. And grief as a process for human beings is, it's individual, but we all have a similar kind of blueprint that we follow. We don't necessarily follow it in the same order, but we move through grief in terms of our capacity to understand what's happened and ultimately to accept what's happened. And it takes time. It takes months and years to get to the point of being comfortable with the loss and with the death of somebody. And one of the things that I talk about a lot, and I've spoken about this with parents of bereaved children, is language as well. In time, the use of language and being able to say, like, I can say that my son died 10 years ago, and I can say my son Joshua is dead. They're very harsh words to use. They're kind of like shocking and slightly jarring words for people to hear. But it also means that I bring myself, my mind, my body, and my spirit to this reality point that this has happened. And it's happened, it's in the past, and I'm grieving that loss. But I'm also able to accept it. Now, people who've lost a loved one, it can take them a year or 2 years to be able to feel any sense of acceptance. and and even after that, especially for parents, like, it's 10 years since Joshua died, and there's not a day that goes by that you don't think about him, but you're also able to start to realize within the first year or two that, you have a responsibility to yourself. And I think what helps people initially is their responsibility to other people. But the true capacity to get past grief is responsibility to yourself, which goes back to the routine, connecting to nature, finding some understanding of meditation or mindfulness or slowing down even, and just being able to allow your body and mind to process what's happening. And it brings up all kinds of things, like to go and to want to record a rap song, and to want to do that for your cousin. That's you internally trying to figure out, how can I fix this, because we all want to fix what's happened. um, and that's fine, because you're doing something that's actually allowing that kind of energy, that anger, to move through your body. When we block that energy, like in Chinese medicine, they talk about, the qi. Don't allow the feng qi to hold on in the body, because then it creates pain, physical pain. So letting it out is so important, and it's important to process. But I think, I'm giving you a long answer, but go back to one point where you said about how do you be there for people when they've lost somebody. When your loved one dies, everybody's there for like 2 weeks, right? And the funeral, and then everybody's there for like the next few days, and then poof, everybody's gone, right? And you're then left there going like, holy cow, what happened? Where is our life? And have we just lost somebody? Like, it almost becomes surreal. That you've seen, the coffin, you've seen the last moments, you remember, the interaction with everybody at the funeral, but it's almost kind of surreal. So people who are really struggling at the coal face after losing somebody need communication. And I think, you're right, like saying, hey, give me a call if you need me. That's not going to happen. So I think we need to kind of be a little bit more assertive. And the great thing is we've got like WhatsApp and text messages and stuff. So you can message them and say, I'm thinking about you. I hope you're okay. And if you need me, I'm here if you want to talk. So just dropping in and giving that sense of communication, then you'll get a sense from them as to whether or not they need to have a conversation. And then it's okay to talk, and to don't not mention the dead. Like
Yeah.
people don't talk to me about Joshua because they're like, oh God, how do I talk about his dead kid? Well, I want to talk about him because I loved him. He was massively impactful in our life. And he wasn't a monster. He was a beautiful little kid who died.
Yeah.
But we get caught in this kind of don't talk about dead people conversation. And we have to bring it up because these people are beautiful and rich. And, for your cousin to get to the point of suicide with mental health. And I was there. I was right at suicidal ideation myself before I went to therapy. It's an impossible thing for us to understand. And even when I reflect back on how I felt at that time planning my own suicide, it's beyond words to feel that I'm the same person now. But when you get into that darkest of spaces and you feel like there is nothing else that's going to help you, and it's not because you're not loved, it's not because you don't have support of people around you and your friends and your family, it's because you've lost that connection to yourself. You've lost that capacity to love yourself. So it can't be fixed by another person. So somebody who thinks, well, if only I was there, I could have helped. When you lose that sense of love and connection, the only hope is that there is a conversation. They do speak about it, they own it, and they open up about it, and then they can get into therapy. But if they don't speak to it and they don't want to talk about it, nobody can save them. Somebody once said to me before, the most important thing to learn in life is that nobody's coming to save you. You've got to do it yourself. It's like your time to show up. And that's the reality, unfortunately, of having to reflect back on what could I have done differently to stop them committing suicide. Probably very little.
Yeah, it's good advice. I remember that the communications, trying to like even sitting there with like the cursor on my phone, like what do I even write to my, what what could you possibly write in that moment, you know? Um, but yeah, and it's true that we have this this fear of bringing up the dead for sure. Like even talking to you now, you know, like I was like I didn't even want to like bring it up to you, you know. It's like God, that's a, you know, and it's like there's so many. I mean, first off, like I'm afraid of my own mortality in some sense, right? And just even facing that on my own level, like kind of knowing that I'm not going to be around here forever, or what would there. I did a meditation like probably 6 months ago. It was like a Stoic meditation where you're supposed to visualize like losing a family member or losing a wife or something like that, like, and just try and I remember getting out of the sauna, going over to my kids and like giving them all a hug because it was just such a moment. And she's like, what, you know, again, my wife is always like this perfect mirror, like, what are you doing, you know? But the amount of the level of gratitude in that moment was just, it was nothing that you could fake. It was so tangible, I guess. But I don't know. Just I like again, I'm just so appreciative of you being able to get online with me and talk with me about that. And you know, it's uh it's just something that's just life, you know. Seems like
Yeah, it is, and within the Stoic meditations and uh, understanding and connecting to our own vulnerabilities, the reality that we're all dying, right? It's just a question of time, but we're all dying. It's a ticking bomb, and I often reflect and spend time thinking about what happens if my wife dies or my other son dies, because when my son Joshua died, um, 5 years, no, 8 years prior to his death, my nephew died, and he was 18 months old, and he died of meningitis.
oh,
He died just before they started inoculating kids in Europe, and I was there the weekend that he died. I'd flown back to Ireland. I was living in London at the time, and that really traumatized me for quite some time. I remember a period when I came back to London, and I was just drinking, and just my mind was blown. I didn't have kids at this stage, but when I did have kids, my biggest fear was, what if one of them dies? And one of them died.
mm,
And part of my own self healing and coming to terms with that reality was also to accept that highly unlikely, but my other son could die, my wife could die, young. Um, they're all going to die, obviously. But the reality is that as we move into that really uncomfortable place and space, we have to also start to understand and realize that our nature, the nature of our relationships, needs to be interdependent and not dependent. If we become dependent, then the pain is just too much
mm,
when we think about what can happen. So it's an interdependent relationship. Is I'm here for them, they're here for me, but ultimately I have to manage myself. I have to take care of myself. It's my responsibility. So those types of Stoic meditations are really quite powerful, and it's fantastic to feel this great sense of gratitude, because we take for granted that our kids are around forever. My kid is 14, and he's like 180 centimeters. He's like 3 centimeters away from me at this stage. And he's going to be a man soon, and he looks like a man already. So you got to enjoy these moments, because we also know from a neurological standpoint that the the the, the human being is programmed that when it hits kind of 13 years of age, there's a realization within our kind of genome that says, oh yeah, okay, mom and dad, I'm going to outlive them, so they're not my tribe anymore. I need to
oh,
find a new tribe.
yeah,
So we actually create this disdain towards our parents that lasts for about 10 years, and that's to
right.
allow kids to separate from that tribe and find their own tribe. So we call it teenage genetics, but it's a reality. So that will happen, and your kids will go off and find their own tribe, and then they come back and they think, oh, you weren't that bad, really. So it's part of their genetic makeup to find a new tribe, because they will outlive you and they have to find that. So we're 200,000-year-old tribal genomes that are deciding seek food, shelter, procreate. And by the way, your parents are going to die, so you got to find somebody else quickly.
That's nice to have this background in a sense, and just be like, not take it personal.
Yeah,
It's
don't take it personally. They're pre-programmed to do it. We all did it too, right?
yeah, and the word disdain is too. It's just like literally like I just called him. I just would say I was an asshole to like to the people around me, and I just knew everything better. It's like this whole
Yeah,
like basically I was 25, 26 already in my mind, even though I was 16 or something, and
yeah.
yeah, so that makes sense. I didn't ever make connect the dots that it's actually it's our genes controlling us, giving us a better chance in the world to succeed. Because it's like, okay, these two, they got me this far. They did their main job. Now it's time for me to start taking care of myself, and so I have to create that separation and create this own this own environment that I own it. It's my environment, and it's worse when the parents kind of hold that back, right? And it creates even more of a it's like more magnetic, right? Like the more that you sit there and try and hold on and grasp and have a dependent instead of interdependent,
Yeah,
it creates even more of a separation,
exactly. And also, space is so important too. Like, the funny thing is, uh, yesterday, yeah, I think it was yesterday. I walked into the kitchen. My son was at the end of the breakfast bar eating his breakfast. I opened the fridge and I'm trying to think, what do I want to take out of the fridge? And then, like, there's like 30 seconds passes, and then he just comments, the environment is screwed and you're leaving the fridge door open. You got to make your decisions before you go to the fridge door, because, now you're ruining the world for me and all of my friends. So I'm like going, whoa, okay. So I close the fridge and I kind of look at him and just nod in acknowledgement. And then I realize I need to just leave the room now and then come back in again. So I just walk out of the kitchen, I walk out the front door. We live on a marina, and I just walk over to the marina, walk around for 5 minutes, come back in again, walk back into the kitchen. And then he goes, oh, have you seen the latest thing about Lionel Messi going to PSG? This is unbelievable. So if you interact with them, you're going to have a massive bust up, right? But if you
Right.
actually just step away, in a second, they've already forgotten it. We're not able to drop things as adults, but
Yeah.
kids, teenagers can poke you
Mm.
and then withdraw. And in Buddhist psychology, we call this the first and second dart, right? So when
Okay.
somebody comes at you and they have a go at you, they throw the first dart. If you can see the first dart, receive it and notice it and go, that's the first dart. If I respond by throwing the second dart, all warfare breaks out. But if I actually just drop the dart and walk away, when I come back again, we don't need to have the argument.
That's nice. That's like a personal success story too, because you come back in and he brings it up, and you're probably just internally just going, "Gosh, that's great." That he just
Honestly, try it. Anybody who's got teenagers, give it a go, and you'll see it works, because
yeah,
they don't hold grudges.
right. So it was
They're
like
just poking boundaries. They want to go, I'm leaving here. They don't even know they're doing it, but they're poking boundaries because they need to show that you are no longer infallible, because you were infallible for 12 years,
right,
but now
right.
you're
Think
very
about that.
fallible.
Infallible for 12 years to the point of almost to that's so true. Like it's so easy to take that for granted too. My son is not there. He's 9, and I can make the biggest mistake, and it's just like, I got you, dad. We're in this together. Right? It's like the exact opposite. It's like he almost reinforces my bad behavior.
Yeah,
It's right, because he's we're in this together, and all of a
yeah.
sudden it's like this is off. That whole togetherness, you can just forget all that. I'm on my own now. That's really interesting. One thing that you said about the dart is really interesting too. That reminds me of some type of meditation I was listening to about what's his name, Goldstein. Joseph Goldstein, I think.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Gosh, is he also from Great Britain somewhere? Because he has a little bit of an accent somehow. I mean, I think
Uh,
he's in the States now, but
yeah, I think he's in the States, but I don't know. I don't know if he's just East Coast and well traveled. I don't know if he's British or not.
that doesn't matter. His somehow his voice just resonates with me. The way that he talks and the stories that he tells are just so like he's in these practice. He's in this moment where I think his teacher was poking him on purpose, right? Like he kind of just pokes him and tries to get him to react. And I think there was something that he was writing or he was doing some type of work for him. And no matter what he did, every time he brought it back, he would his teacher would always find some silly, stupid mistake in
Yeah,
this thing and give it to him, be like, redo it. And it took him, he said, at least like 15 or 16 tries of redoing it until he realized that this guy was just messing with him, that this guy was just poking at him. And once he realized it, he and once his reaction to this rejected paper was put back in his hand, and he reacted like, oh, whatever, it's no big deal, whatever, and they're gonna do it anyway. He stopped rejecting it. He accepted it. So it was like that was the whole thing had nothing to do with the paper. It was had to do with this first dart, second dart thing. And that,
exactly.
yeah, that's good. And he made another one that stuck with me with a cat, that he was in a hut somewhere where they have like a kind of like a no door, but it's just like a floppy cloth. And so he goes down into his hut and he goes to meditate, and the cat came in because there's no door that can block this cat from coming in. So he takes the cat off his lap and puts the cat outside and goes back to his meditation. The cat comes back in and sits on his lap, and he's like, so he does that. And he said again there, he did it like at least 10 or 15 times until he's just like, oh, whatever, man. Then just, okay, cat, I'm doing the meditation. We're doing it together. And the cat got up and walked away. Like it sensed this acceptance of the situation, and the cat's like, oh well, I guess it's not working for me anymore, because he can feel what is that? There's like this energy, or there's some type of chemical reaction or something that this cat was feeding off of the whole time and wanted to play, and that was his game. And as soon as the game was no longer there, the cat's like, oh, okay, peace out, I'm gonna go catch a bird or something.
Yeah, and I think we all give off an energy, and animals are incredible. I have 2 golden retrievers, and when I meditate, they just know, and they're just like drop to the ground. But
Yeah.
I think the idea of frustration in meditation. I remember once being in a session with one of my teachers, and we were talking about. He was saying, "Oh, how did you get on yesterday?" And I said, "Oh, it was okay, but there's a construction work going on outside our house, and I was trying to meditate, and the noise of construction was just incredible." And he's an Indian master, and he just said to me, "You'll get better at it when you learn to meditate to the sound of the construction noise." And it's that bringing in everything that's there, like even the irritations, the difficulty, the cat that's moving around, the noise of construction, and being with it, and finding a capacity to sit with even the most difficult of things. You notice that as you sit with them, and you no longer try and interact with them, that you settle. But it's also then learning to unlearn this need to be perfect, which is very much I think the Joseph Goldstein lesson there with his teacher. And when I was training in Japan, and I was doing master training with the Theyamabushi, so you go on this like 5-day kind of grueling pilgrimage, where you have no food, you have no idea of time. They take your watch, they take your phone. You have to wear all these traditional Japanese death robes. So you're dressed to die.
Oh, that's what those are. That's why they're white.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
they're death robes. Nice.
yeah. So the Yamabushi wear death robes, so they're always happy to die, always ready. And the
Right.
Yamabushi is connected to the samurai lineage, so it's about acceptance of death, and then the reemergence from the sacred mountains, with an understanding that life is to be appreciated. But I remember a couple of things on that. One was every day you have to get dressed and put on all of these clothing, and it's so complicated to put it all on.
Yeah.
And I'd be struggling with it. And Master Hoshino, who was leading us, who's like 76 years of age, this incredibly agile, fit guy, because we would be hiking for 8 hours up mountains. But he would literally be like so annoyed at you because you can't get your stuff on, right? You're not allowed to speak, so there's no communication, we're allowed eye contact, but you feel that somebody's like looking at you and he's grunting and pointing, and you're like, oh man, the pressure to do this. Like at any moment, you could just, jack it all in and leave.
Yeah.
But you're under that sense of pressure. But I remember on the 5 days, which was really, really hard and really grueling physically. No food, no contact with each other. We're not allowed to look at each other. If anybody falls in a mountain, you're not allowed to pick them up. You have to leave them there. They have to do their own thing, right? So this is all about nobody coming to save you. You've got to take care of yourself.
Okay.
So we're on the 5th day, and we're coming down the mountain. We've on the back end of a typhoon. There's water torrents pouring down the mountain, and in an hour's time, I know I'm going to have my first meal for 5 days, and we're going to be able to talk about our experiences, because we encountered some incredible things during those 5 days. But all the way through, all of our focus is pay attention. So the whole focus when we're training with them is you must keep paying attention to yourself, because if you don't, you're in treacherous environments. You can fall off cliffs, you can fall off into lakes. It's you sign multiple disclaimers. When the Japanese make you sign a disclaimer, it's not like the US where everything's disclaimed. The Japanese tell you might die. You probably might die, right? You arrive there and you go, oh, okay, these are real disclaimers.
Right.
But I'm coming down the mountain, and I'm descending with the rest of the team, and there's 8 of us coming down, and we're moving quite quickly through this kind of water torrent, coming off the 3rd highest mountain in Japan. And there's an hour to go. My lunch is in my head, and I literally think to myself, I'm doing really well here. And as I had that thought, I put my foot into a hole that was concealed by the water torrent, and it was about probably 4 foot deep.
Oh,
so I went right into it. My right leg went right into it, and I hit my head smack onto the rock in front. And as I did that, the water torrent was so horrendous that I was then trapped, and I was kind of being waterboarded by the mountain water. I couldn't catch my breath, and the water kept pouring in. And all I could see in the corner of my eye was all of the Theyamabushi troop running past me, because nobody's allowed to look at me and nobody's allowed to help me. So they all run past me, and I'm like choking with water. Don't know if I've broken my leg. My head is hurting. There's blood coming down from my eye, and I'm trying to pull myself out of this hole. So I get out of the hole. You've seen all the gear that we wear in the Yamabushi, so you have all these wraps around you. So I realized I've got to use these to kind of tie up my ankle, which is all bust up. My knee is bust up, and descend down the mountain, which they're waiting for me to go back and conclude and have our lunch. But it was a great moment to realize that within those 5 days, I thought suddenly I'd mastered it. And the lesson is, don't think you can master life, because you can't. It's something's always going to come around the corner and bite you, and that certainly did. But the rule and the most important thing is pay attention to your life. Pay attention to it. Like if you're feeling low, if you're feeling miserable, pay attention. What's going on? How's your nutrition? Are you taking any supplements? Have you been outside recently? Have you got a meditation practice? Are you abusing alcohol? Are you abusing other substances? Are you addicted to Netflix? If you just pay attention to yourself, everything that you need will become clear. And that was the lesson that day, which I failed to do.
Man, it's funny. It's like an instant, like the moment, right? It's like, okay, and here's the hole. This is perfectly placed in that moment for you to step in. Gosh. Yeah. And it's a crazy fact to know that that they're all there, but you're in that on your own. So it's the whole idea of the training is that you're basically alone on that mountain.
You're alone on the mountain. That's it. It's you and nobody else. And ultimately, the harsh reality is we're all obsessed all the time trying to be a certain way because we want to impress other people, right? But in reality, nobody really pays that much attention to us anyway, because everybody else is also obsessed about how they're going to impress other people. So we're, billions of people all milling around thinking how we can impress each other and not paying attention to ourselves.
Mhm.
So the power of self-development and healing comes when you realize that you're not really that important and nobody really cares because they're all thinking about their own stuff.
That's great. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's that ego is a little bit, I always think about that, like how much the ego really does. It seems like it's good in some situations that you want to use it, but it seems like in more times than not that it can also just. I don't. What is that like like in the neuroscience about the ego? Like, is there anything you can say there about that? And what that is? What this? Why do I need to like pose this, have this outside Remington that is projected to the world? Why is this image so important to me? What other people think. It's like a tribal thing. I want to be part of the tribe. I want to be accepted.
Yes, yes,
Mm,
acceptance is key. If you think about people who are chronically depressed, you find that they're staying in, they're not interacting with people. So there's a huge amount of pain comes through the disassociation. So sadly, what happens with depression is that we withdraw. Now, if you look at old cultural approaches to depression, like depression is not something that we just found in the 20th century. It's been around for thousands of years. But the way that we used to heal depression previously was that you would be taken care of by the village. So you would literally be given time to go and heal, to rest, to sleep. Somebody would take care of your kids.
mm,
A lot of traditions they would use psilocybin. So magic mushrooms, have been part of depression healing in cultures from Europe to South America to Africa. And the mushrooms are there to allow you to really see the true nature of life and your experience in terms of why am I depressed. So
mm,
then we work through it. Thankfully, now in the last 10 years, we're starting to use psilocybin again in psychiatric therapy to understand how it can be incredibly powerful. But we use that to allow us to integrate back into society. So the ego is important because the ego wants to be seen by other people, and that keeps us safe in terms of that human interaction. And some people's ego means that they rise up in the hierarchy and they want to be the leader of the tribe. But it's a fine balance. Deepak
yeah.
Chopra says about the ego. He says ego stands for edging God out, and you have to be careful about that. So I think the spirit is the true nature of ourselves. I think our spirit, like when you referred to the plant earlier. If you water it too much, it has a problem. If you water it too little, it has a problem. It must have enough light. It must be in a nice environment. And nature teaches us so much. So we have to have the right environment for ourselves. And ego is good because it can help us seek shelter. It can help us procreate. Without that, how would we ever be able to find somebody who can be sexually attracted to us? So that's important to build something, to find the nice. I need to do that because I need to move up through my tribe. And I will go out and find food, and so in modern worlds that's developing us and pushing us in our careers.
Mm,
But there's a fine line then where it becomes overconsumption. And I worked in financial services, and I was definitely consumed by ego, where I actually thought I am just the best thing ever, and I don't need anybody else. So your internal plant, which I really believe is like the vagus nerve, right?
mm,
It's not being nurtured and nourished properly. So it starts to dwindle, it starts to lose potency, and it starts to die. And then your internal organs are going wrong. Your mental state is going wrong. Your microbiome in your stomach is going wrong.
mm.
And you start medicating, which is generally kind of steroids that you're putting in and antidepressants, which are then hiding you from the pain. So ego is such a fine balance. If you step on it too far, it's terrible. But if you can just manage to keep it in check, it'll help you through what you need. We all need a little bit of ego.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. How did he say that? EGO was uh,
EGO, so edging God out.
edging edging God out. Yeah.
Edging God out.
So
So
don't.
when you lose that sense of spirit and service to the world, you know that ego has taken over.
Yeah. It's tricky, especially if you're in a situation where you're forced every day to kind of, fight in a certain sense. That's the ego plays a good role there. It's like I got to get through this. This is the only thing that's really helping me here is my determinism to push through. And um yeah, but at the same time, like when I see guys like David Goggins, it's like he's a freak of nature, like that guy. But it's almost like again there he lets his body completely go to the wayside. And I don't even think it's ego anymore. I think he's actually relinquished his ego to just pushing. He pushes his mind in a way where I just amazes me that the human body is, well, he's basically ruining his body with the strength of his mind. I mean, he had a picture of his hand where it was like after 1,000, it was like all ripped open, and then in Instagram, and it was like I did 1,000 pull-ups after that picture.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking to myself, like, how does someone get so mentally like, well, okay, if you listen to his book and then you kind of understand, well, that's nobody wishes that on any child, what he went through. So obviously
No.
this juxtaposition of his mental strength and how he got to be so strong is sad. But at the same time, it's just the propensity for the human brain to push the body beyond. I don't know. It just amazes me. It just interests me so much to see that in someone. It's very motivating, especially when, like when you're having a mentally tough day or even a physically tough day. I think about that. It's a really motivating thing to be like, well, David Goggins is probably out running an ultra marathon right now, so I should probably just go out for my walk in the forest.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think look, Goggins is just a complete anomaly in terms of human behavior. And I'm one of my good friends is Rich Roll, who's Rich was one of the first people to have Goggins on his podcast years ago, and Rich will always say like Goggins is just that's exactly who he is. Like he's no different when the microphone is off. When you meet him beforehand, he's just on it all the time. But I always think that when it comes to people who are living kind of ultra lives, of course, you will always find like if you look at professional sports people, if you look at successful CEOs, my own successes in entrepreneurial world, building and selling companies, there's always a spark back in childhood. There's always something that you end up running away from that creates that idea of difference. So to date, I have never met a successfully driven individual who is like in that 1% category, who hasn't had some kind of trauma or difficulty growing up. And that really defines them and teaches them that, nobody's coming to save me. I've got to do this all by myself. But there's also a point in time where I think you have to find some peace with it as well. I think if you're running ultra marathons, every year and the training attached to that is just horrendous. What are you running from? Is there something that you should really slow down and pay a bit of attention to? Because if your physical activity is as destructive on your life as alcoholism or drug addiction, then you need to kind of pay attention to it. Everything should be in balance. I'm not saying that, Goggins is extraordinary, but I do think we have to question ourselves sometimes when, unless I do this thing, I don't feel like I'm human. Then maybe the thing is behind that. There is unresolved issues in terms of traumatic experience that you need to pay attention to. And then you can still enjoy these things, but be careful that you're not doing something to hide from a reality that you need to face into, because that's where you'll best heal your mental and physical health.
Yeah, and there's like this sense of like, who doesn't want to be this 1% guy if you're motivated? Like I'm a motivated guy, but I know that like I didn't have some spark at a young age that drove me to that. I don't have that. I didn't have that. I can't like, especially compared to like someone like Goggins, but I also like I had a pretty good life. My parents split up and it was relatively, it's a normal life. I still was loved, and everyone, I grew up and everyone thought I was great, probably too great, then probably better than this typical, like in the States, it's like everything you do is amazing, it's like, it's probably just average, right? Like, just be honest, and so it's like, but you're right. Like there's this point even now. Like I'm 37, and that's weird too. That somehow plays a role. Like I'm thinking, well, okay, I'm 40-year-old man now. Finally, I'm gonna be a man. Now I'm 40, so I have to be a man. Now I'm really on my own. I have to be. It's like it takes me that long to, it's so weird to think that like there has to be some situation that just throws you under the bus. It has to happen. Like, and it's too bad too. Like, I wish you could just learn it from others. And I've read books, and I've read the motivation books, and I've done the Tony Robbins thing, and I've done the Four Agreements, and I've done Tim Ferriss, and and I'm still searching, and I listen to the meditation. I do, Sam Harris, and what's the other guy, Peterson here,
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson, and they all have, and none of them really know, right? It's just like it's all this. It's everyone's just putting it out there, right? And the that's and that my dad was giving me. I was talking to him the other day. He's like, because I had a podcast and I was kind of just in a bad mood, and he could feel it he could just tell I was like not. I was being too hard on myself, And he's like, gave me a call. He's like, man, just take it easy, you're good. But it's like, what is that? Like you wanna. How do you keep that fire lit? One of these guys on Instagram or on LinkedIn that I follow is like fire in the belly. You keeps that fire. Like I look at a guy like Elon Musk, and I'm like, what drives this guy? Again, crazy childhood. Like they didn't even talk about it in the book. Like there was something that really went down there that like no one talked about.
Yes.
So it's like there's that spark, and but it's like, well, I want to emulate that. I don't need that spark, but I want to emulate that at some type of spark to give me that fire in my belly every day to change the world in the way that I can best change it, really, to find myself, to understand, okay, what is that gift that I have, and it's authentic, and then deliver it. But on like a level of execution, not just like I want to do it. But I like organize my life around like you have. Like when I look at how you've done this, like the way that you before that you were an successful guy in your financial world, and then this tragedy hit, and you took a whole nother trajectory. But in everything you do, there's a level of execution, there's a level of discipline that you've integrated into everything, and that just, it amazes me. And I know what discipline is, but it's like, do I really know? Do you really know what that means to be disciplined? Because for me, like my buddy was telling me when I was doing this hour and a half in the morning before everybody else, he was like, wow, you're really disciplined. I'm like, actually, it doesn't feel like discipline, because it was so rewarding to me. I felt like I was giving it to myself. So it really wasn't hard to get up.
Yes,
I guess,
and that's the key. You've nailed it when you feel like this is what I'm doing for myself.
yeah.
At the start, it's discipline, but then over time, it becomes routine.
Right. So maybe that's like, and then the fact that I lost it at some point, maybe it was like the discipline would be to pull it back in and be like, no, keep on it. Like go back to it and
go back to it. Because also I think, in terms of the drive and determination, I was a workaholic before my son died, and Joshua made me into a really good father for Luca and a good husband to Beatrice. If he hadn't have died, I don't think our marriage would have lasted, because I was becoming pretty intolerable. So I think in terms of how we see other people, when you look at all of these great motivational speakers who publish books, etc., everybody's being sold on, the better version of you and the 2.0 and all that. My interest when I talk to people is, what would it be like just to be you? Like, what would it be like to kind of just settle within yourself and understand who you are and where you came from? And to have that conversation with your dad, Remington, is so powerful, because like when you come from loving parents and you have a good relationship with them, like what they bring into the world is really good, human beings who are able to be of social valuable to their community. We unfortunately have pivoted a view to think, I need to be Elon Musk, I need to be Steve Jobs, I need to be Tony Robbins. Now look at all of their personal lives. Look how successful their marriages are, how their kids are. And Tony does good stuff in terms of his own personal development. But he's divorced. I'm sure his kids think he's probably an asshole because he's never around, because he's fine all over the place telling everybody how to help themselves. I
I
think
mean,
as
it's
parents, we got to take care of our kids.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and even in the very, very old books, I remember listening to the original ones. He talked about like that. He was open about that. Like he just shared all this trauma in his life. Yet, yeah, it's such a yeah. It's that thing. It's like this image that we're sold on. On I mean, I don't want to go the Instagram route and everything like that, but it's Instagram just I guess just intensifies this story that everyone always tells themselves, that I want to, if you want to be this successful guy and do something, or successful woman and create something, the values of family and all that, they always seem to fall on the wayside like this. And
Totally.
yeah, yeah,
Totally. And at the end of the day, all that you really leave on this planet are your children, and how they're going to manage life is going to be based around, how you nurtured and nourish them. That's it.
yeah. And if you come home from work and you're still at work, you work the 60-hour day or 60-hour week, and you're still busting it out, and you come home, you're still at work, right? You're still not mentally there. And then your son tells you to close the refrigerator door because you just fly off the handle and be like, it's my refrigerator, I'll do whatever I want. And then it's like, oh, really? Your refrigerator? Well, I'm gonna go get my own refrigerator. And then just have like this whole thing, and it just goes down that whole route where you're like, man, if I had just been down to earth in that moment and seen it for what it is, and just it changes the trajectory of the whole relationship, right?
It does. And the love that we have is so deep. I always love that, Bruce Springsteen song The River, in the live version, he does this kind of monologue where he's talking about how he's grown up and his relationship with his dad and how tough it was. And it was Vietnam at the time. And his dad was like just fed up with this teenage kid, coming home late and not being respectful. And his dad was like, when the army gets you, it's going to make a man of you.
Yeah.
And that was the mantra he kept repeating to him. And then, the draft came in, Springsteen got called up. He went for the medical and the physical, and he didn't even tell his parents. But he had to cut his hair, and he came back and he failed his medical. And his old man said to him, you cut your hair, what happened? And he says, oh, I had to go got the draft call, and I had to go and get my medical. And the dad was like, so how did you get on? Like, what's happening? And he said, oh, I failed my medical. And his dad was like, that's great, and gave him a hug. That's the real core of our relationship with our kids is love. And if we try and tell them that we want them to be a certain thing or do a certain thing, or you need to go and study this in college, or you need to be that type of person, we're just feeding into that algorithm that they've already got, that, you're a bit of an asshole and I need to get out of this house. Whereas if you give them space and allow them to just develop into who they need to be and love them, they'll be all right.
Yeah, that's good advice, man. That's especially because I know it's coming around the corner for me. I got but the 9-year-old, you already see the hormones they kind of coming in. Everyone, like, it's not really there yet, but it's around the corner. And then
Comes quickly.
Yeah, they come. Yeah, exactly. Just see, like he went to summer camp this year. He was a week away, and the first couple of days, like I think after day 3, he came back home for one night, and we're like, oh yeah, it's okay. He's still not that grown up, We're like, my wife and I were so happy that like he still wanted to come home, and then he went back and did like the next 3 days, and finished it off until like a Saturday or something like that. But it was just so like that was the first thing we're like, oh, now he's getting to that age where he already wants to like. He enjoyed himself so much. He didn't think about us at all, during that process. During the day, of course not. And then at night, I think one night kind of hit him weird, but it's good. So it's like he's still not there yet. But eventually that's going to be gone, right? That's
Yeah, it is. But like, my son is 14 now, and we still hang out. We're gonna go to Scotland next week for a couple of days, just the two of us.
Yeah.
So the relationship changes and evolves, and you have to kind of meet them where they are. Don't expect your kids to come and meet you where you are.
Yeah.
You've got to meet them where they are, and that way you can keep the relationship alive.
Yeah. And Justin, I appreciate it. I think it's a good time to just say our goodbyes. I felt like we had really good connection there. Again, thank you so
Thanks.
much for getting online with me, and it's given me like you basically you gave me just a little little session there that was much needed. So
I appreciate it. It was a really nice conversation. So thanks, Rem.
all right, man. Well, then I'll be in contact with you. I'll let you know when we get this released and everything.
Yeah, cool. Send it on. Send me an email, let me know, and I'll share it on my social media stuff.
All right.
So
Take it
well
easy,
done.
man.
It was a really good conversation, though. Thanks very much. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thank you too. Have a good one. Have a good day.
You too. Stay in touch, man.
All right. Bye bye.